After assuming command of Confederate forces around Richmond after the Battle of Seven Pines, the general strategic plan that is rapidly taking form in the mind of General Robert E. Lee contemplates an offensive against that part of McClellan's force north of the Chickahominy River. Little is known of the position of the right wing of the Army of the Potomac. Presumably, it has been placed where it is for the twofold purpose of forming a junction with Major General McDowell and of protecting the line of supply from White House Landing on the Pamunkey River. Lee wonders how far the Federal flank has been extended and if it guards the ridge between the Chickahominy and the next stream to the northeast, Totopotomoy Creek, an affluent of the Pamunkey River. For most particular reason known only to a few, General Lee desires these questions answered. A reconnaissance-in-force is, of course, the means of ascertaining the facts. Cavalry will have to undertake the reconnaissance and, in doing so, they might drive some cattle into the Confederate lines. Should they find that the Federals are using the road that leads to McClellan's right, an opportunity might offer destroying Union wagon trains. On June 10, 1862, Brigadier General Jeb Stuart, then 29 and in command of all the cavalry in Lee's reorganized Army in Northern Virginia, is called to General Lee's Army headquarters at the Dabbs House, also known as High Meadows, on the 9-mile road outside Richmond. Stuart has been with the Confederate Army through all its experiences since the day he had charged on the extreme left flank on Henry House Hill at the Battle of Manassas. His zest, his vigilance, his skill in reconnaissance soon increased the admiration that General Joseph E. Johnston had formed for him in the Shenandoah Valley during the summer of 1861. He is a rare man, Johnston wrote of Stuart on August 10, 1861. Wonderfully endowed by the nature that the qualities necessary for an officer of light cavalry. Johnston continued, calm, firm, acute, active, and enterprising. I know of no one more competent than he to estimate the occurrences before him at their true value. If you can add to this army a real brigade of cavalry, you'll find no better brigadier general to command it. Newspaper correspondents with the army shared Johnston's opinion and praised Stuart often. The conduct of the young colonel in an affair at Lewinsville on September 11th brought further commendation from Johnston in a plea that he be advanced in rank. After President Davis granted Stuart promotion on September 24th, the new brigadier general soon became one of the shining figures of the Confederate camp in Manassas. All the advanced outposts were placed under him. In the projected reorganization of the Confederate Army of the Potomac on October 22, 1861, he was to command all the cavalry. On December 20, 1861, he had a clash with the Federals at the Battle of Drainesville, where he lost 194 men, both foot and horse. Although he could not then bring himself to admit defeat, it was characteristic of him never to do so. He had distinctly the worst of the encounter. Thereafter, his service was routine. He covered well the retreat from Manassas. At Waynesburg, he aided in putting troops in position where his own forces were unoccupied. In front of Seven Pines, where Woods immobilized the cavalry, he acted virtually as an aide to Longstreet. In none of these events had he gratified measurably his martial ambition or won the loud plaudits he craved. Stuart does not lack the self-confidence or self-opinion. On the fourth day of Lee's command, Stuart feels that he should suggest a strategical plan to the new commanding general. The young cavalryman argues that the Federals will not advance until they have perfected their defensive works and armament on the south side of the Chickahominy River. As a result, Stuart says, a pitched battle here, though a victory, would be utterly fruitless to us. The proper course, Stuart goes on, is to hold the Confederate left on the Chickahominy with a heavy concentration of artillery and attack to the south of that stream. The youthful instructor of his superior general concludes, we have an army far better adapted to attack than defense. Let us fight at an advantage before we are forced to fight at a disadvantage. It may seem presumption in me to give these views, but I have not thus far mistaken the policy and practice of the enemy. At any rate, I would rather incur the charge of presumption than fold my arms in silence and indifference to the momentous crisis at hand. Be assured, however, General, that whatever course you may pursue, you'll find nowhere a more zealous and determined cooperator and supporter than yours with the highest respect. The earnestness and naivete of this has offset the defects of the strategy suggested, which essentially is that of throwing a numerically inferior force on a long front against an entrenched foe who has greatly superior artillery. Now, on June 10th, Brigadier General Stuart is not summoned to discuss strategy, but execution. As he is ushered into the office of General Lee, Stuart is introduced to the opportunity for which he has been waiting. Quietly, he is told by Lee of the design for an offensive north of the Chickahominy, and the importance of ascertaining how far the enemy outposts extend on the ridge. As the purpose of reconnaissance is revealed, Stuart's imagination takes fire. He can do more than ascertain the position of the Federal right. If the commanding general permits it, he would ride entirely around McClellan's Army of the Potomac. Lee probably shakes his head at so rash a proposal, but Stuart will not dismiss it from his mind. In high expectancy, he rides back to his own headquarters. The color of the adventure is heightened that very evening. Lee sends Stuart the substance of intelligence reports which indicates that the Federals are stronger on their right than had been anticipated. There might lie ahead more than an exciting ride. A fight might be the reward of diligence and aggressiveness. The next day, June 11th, a courier hands Stuart his instructions in General Lee's signature. Caution is enjoined in these words: "You will return as soon as the object of your expedition is accomplished, and you must bear constantly in mind, while endeavoring to execute the general purpose of your mission, not to hazard unnecessarily your command or attempt what your judgment may not approve, but be content to accomplish all the good you can without feeling it necessary to obtain all that might be desired. I recommend that you take only such men as can stand the expedition, and that you take every means in your power to save and cherish those you take. You must leave sufficient cavalry here for the service of this army, and remember that one of the chief objects of your expedition is to gain intelligence for the guidance of future operations. Should you find upon investigation that the enemy is moving to his right, or is so strongly posted as to render your expedition inopportune, as its success, in my opinion, depends upon its secrecy, you will, after gaining all the information you can, resume your former position." Three times in the letter, that important word expedition is read by Stuart in his instructions. The affair is being lifted above the level of scouting, even armed reconnaissance. Stuart reads, ponders, and proceeds at once with his plans. Stuart decides to bring along Fitz Lee, Robert E. Lee's nephew, and the same Fitz Lee who had been the aide to Richard S. Ewell at Manassas, now colonel of Stuart's former unit, the 1st Virginia Cavalry Regiment. Fitz Lee would command his regiment on the expedition, along with 4 companies of the 4th Virginia Cavalry, whose colonel, William C. Wickham, had been wounded at Williamsburg. The second son of General Lee, the quiet, handsome, and capable Rooney Lee, who had celebrated his 25th birthday on the same day the Battle of Seven Pines was fought, would take part of his 9th Virginia Cavalry with him, and 2 squadrons of the 4th. Lieutenant Colonel William T. Martin, commander of the Jeff Davis Cavalry Legion, would pick 250 of the best men in his command, as well as men from Boykin, South Carolina Mountain Rangers, to lead on the expedition. The Stuart Horse Artillery, led by the capable young Captain Pelham, would also come along and supply a 12-pounder howitzer and a 10-pounder rifled gun, which is led by 1st Lieutenant Jim Breaded. The members of Stuart's staff would naturally also go with them, and with them is Major Harris von Bork, a Prussian army officer on leave, who had joined headquarters as a volunteer aide and had shown joyous intrepidity on the field of Seven Pines. Another staff officer and competent scout for Stuart, Captain John Singleton Mosby, likewise will accompany the expedition. Another scout who Stuart wants to accompany the expedition is the alert and tireless Captain Redmond Burke, who seemed to have been born for outpost service. Still, a third scout who Stuart wants to accompany the expedition is William Downs Farley. These, then, are among the men Stuart selects: Fitz Lee, his cousin Rooney Lee, Will Martin, Jim Breaded, Harris von Bork, John S. Mosby, Redmond Burke, William Farley. These and the best of 1,200 troopers that the Confederate States Cavalry has on hand. Stuart chooses them quietly on June 11th, but apparently does not notify them. The secrecy which General Lee urges on him is to be respected to the letter. All the cavalry hears is a vague rumor that something is afoot. At 2 a.m. on Thursday, June 12, 1862, General Stuart, in the cheeriest of moods, awakens his staff. "Gentlemen, in 10 minutes, he announces, every man must be in the saddle." 10 minutes later, he mounts up with the staff and moves northwest to the skirt around the north side of Richmond. They head to the bivouac site of the 9th Virginia Cavalry located on the rolling hills of the Mordecai Farm 4 miles north of Richmond and west of Brook Road. The 1st Virginia Cavalry had earlier departed their camps east of Richmond and preceded the staff to Mordecai Farm. Quietly and with no sounding of the bugle, the long column begins to set out in motion. Its route is toward Louisa Courthouse, as if it is bound for the Shenandoah Valley, where reports have come of a dazzling victory by Stonewall Jackson at Cross Keys and Port Republic. Reinforcement of Stonewall is presumably the mission of the cavalry, though nothing is confided by Stuart. Along empty roads, past farms where the women wave handkerchiefs or aprons and the old men stare admiringly at the display of so many horses, the troopers ride all day. They cover 22 miles and then go into camp on the Winston Farm near Taylorsville, close to the South Anna River. Scouts are sent out and only 35 troopers are left to their sleep. When everything is in order, Stuart mounts with Rooney Lee and rides to the nearby Hickory Hill, the home of Miss Lee's family and of Colonel William C. Wickham of the 4th Virginia Cavalry. After his win at Williamsburg, the colonel has been paroled by his captors and had been permitted to return to the gracious old plantation, where he was recovering. With him and with the other members of the household, Rooney Lee has long conversations throughout the evening. Stuart, for his part, goes to sleep in his chair. Back at the noiseless camp before dawn on Friday, June 13th, Stuart has a few rockets sent up as a signal for the start of the day's ride, but again he permits no reveille. By this time, he has reports from his scouts that residents say the enemy is not in any of the country to the southeast, as far as Old Church, 20 miles distant by the shortest road. Confidently, when men and beasts are fed, the column gets underway again. The moment it turns towards the east, a stir goes down the files. Despite the ostentatious suggestion of a march to Louisa, the men have suspected that McClellan's flank is their objective, and now they know it. The day for which they had long awaited for has come at last. They are to measure swords with the enemy. Before long, Stuart leaves the road and calls for the field officers into a council. All eyes are fixed on the flashy cavalier as he gives his instructions for the next stage of the reconnaissance, and arouses among his young companions no less enthusiasm than he exhibits. The officers gallop off to take their places with their regiments. The column moves onward, through the woods and past fields where the young corn is showing itself. When the force arrives inside of Hanover Courthouse, which straggles on either side of the road, horses and men are observed. Scouts report that the Federals of the 6th U.S. Cavalry are patrolling the area, but in what strength, nobody in the neighborhood knows. There is a brief firefight between pickets and vedettes of the 6th U.S. Cavalry and Stuart's men of the 1st Virginia Cavalry. However, before the exchange of fire can escalate into anything more than that, the Bluebirds, as the rebel cavalrymen call them, flee from the scene. Rooney Lee's 9th Virginia Cavalry is now in front of the flying column. As the Federals have escaped down the courthouse road, that approach to the village of Old Church is certain to be guarded. Stuart accordingly leaves a highway about a mile below Hanover Courthouse and turning south, follows the route via Tollifer's Mill and Enon Church. The march is hard and rapid. As the sun climbs towards noon, heat radiates from every field, but nobody heeds it. Only one thing matters to the cavalrymen: to find and to drive the enemy. 7 miles are covered from the turnout. Enon Church is passed. Then near Hall's shop, anxious eyes catch a glimpse of Federals. Some are ahead, some in a field on one flank. Before Stuart's leading squadron knows what is astir, the Federals come forward with a roar. They dash almost to the head of the column, fire a shot or two, and veer off. Stuart commands his men to draw sabers and charge. The Confederates sweep forward, and again, to no purpose. A few vedettes are surprised and captured. Some dismounted men are bagged, the others escape. All the satisfaction the Southerners have is in the behavior of their captives. Rumors coming presumably from the prisoners are that the 5th U.S. Cavalry is in front and would make a stand, but Stuart's column moves on at a trot and encounters no opposition. Much to Stuart's surprise, his cavalrymen meet no opposition when they cross Totopotomoy Creek, a difficult little stream with its banks a maze of underbrush. It is now about 3 p.m. Old Church is only 2.5 miles away. There, if anywhere, the enemy would offer resistance, because wagon trains from Piping Tree Ferry and from Newcastle Ferry would have to pass that point in order to supply the right wing of the Federals north of the Chickahominy. The Federal Cavalry Reserve for the Army of the Potomac are known to be under Stuart's own father-in-law, Brigadier General Philip St. George Cooke, a Virginian and a renowned trooper of the Old Army. Stuart knows it cannot be that his father-in-law has neglected that important and exposed crossroad. For the first time that day, military logic is vindicated. Word comes back that the enemy is at a stand and apparently is waiting an attack. Stuart does not hesitate. Straight up the road, the only avenue of approach, he orders the column to charge. With a shout and a roar, the leading column, that of Captain William Latane, dashes forward and throws itself squarely against the Federals. For a few moments there is a mad melee, swords against pistol. Then the Federals make off. A brief second stand, a short distance to the rear, ends in the same manner. When the clash is over, Captain Latane is dead, pierced by 5 bullets. The Federal captain who had met him in combat is said to have been wounded badly by a blow from Latane's saber. A few Federals have been shot or slashed. Several bluecoats are dead, others are taken prisoner. 5 guidon flags are among the trophies, the first that had fallen into the hands of Jeb Stuart's expeditions. In a few moments, the 1st Virginia Cavalry rushes on and soon reaches a camp of the troops who had disputed the advance. The tents are deserted, though supplies are there in abundance. As there is no time to collect even what the men most covet, the place is set ablaze by an ambulance that contains a keg of whiskey. A regal seizure in the eyes of some is rescued and made ready to move with the column. Of men, only a few nearby stragglers are found. The Federals, strong or weak, have disappeared. Brigadier General Stuart is now 14 miles from Hanover Courthouse. He has established the main fact he had been directed to ascertain. There is no Federal force of any consequence on the watershed down which he has ridden. Of that, he can be sure in the report he will make General Lee when he returns. But Stuart decides not to return the way he had come from. The enemy would expect him to do so. If alert, the Federals would burn the bridge across the Potomac. In the event they neglect that, they would of course watch the route by which the column had advanced, and they could waylay the Confederates at or near Hanover Courthouse, to which the most direct road leads. Stuart cannot skirt the village and strike for the South Anna, in an effort to cross the stream and swing back to Richmond on a wide arc. The bridge across the river has been burned, and the fords are impassably high, so Stuart speedily concludes that if he turns back, danger and perhaps disaster would be his. 9 miles to the southeast is Tunstall Station on the York River Railroad, McClellan's main line of supply. Stuart perceives that it would be a great achievement to tear up that railway and, if only for a day or even a few hours, to have the entire Federal Army cut off from the base at the White House Landing. He knows the public would praise such a feat. Ignoring any possibility of danger, Stuart decides to go ahead with the raid on Tunstall Station. He quietly picks his guides from soldiers who reside in the country he is to enter. Over them he places R.E. Fraser, who knows every bypath to Tunstall's. The road of this adventure skirts the Pamunkey River. Southward, the country to the north and northeast were home to great plantations that run down to the meadows and swamps by the streamside. As the column passes, the women and girls and the old men at every house come out to greet the first gray-clad soldiers they have seen in weeks. Now and again there would be a delighted scream of recognition, whereupon some dust-covered boy would break ranks, would leap from his horse and embrace mother or sister. None of these jubilant residents know much concerning the enemy's strength or position. Vessels are known to be at Garlick's Landing. Wagon trains pass frequently. A guard is on the railroad at Tunstall Station. This is all the information Stuart could get. Once, at a great distance to the southwest, tents could be seen. It is surmised that they are McClellan's Army of the Potomac headquarters. After learning from Fraser that Tunstall Station is lightly guarded by 1 or 2 companies of Federal infantry, Stuart advances the head of the column within striking distance and then orders, "Form platoons, draw saber, charge!" Down sweeps the cavalry at a thunderous gallop. The Federals, too few to resist, scatter almost instantly. Some are captured, others flee to the woods. Immediately, designated Confederates begin to tear up the railroad in the delighted knowledge that, if they succeed, they would separate the Federal Army from its base. It is a high moment, perhaps the most triumphant the cavalry had known since the time when the earliest volunteers had galloped across the fields that bordered Bull Run. After tearing up the railroad and burning the supply depot at Tunstall Station, Brigadier General Stuart, for his part, has to make another decision. Should he continue on his way, cross the Chickahominy, and make for his own lines, or should he rush down the railroad and attempt to capture the federal base at White House Landing? Only 4 miles away, if White House Landing can be destroyed, McClellan would be compelled to retreat. The world would resound with praise for the leader of 1,200 men who had forced 100,000 to break off an attempted siege of Richmond. Such a prospect is alluring. However, Stuart soon learns that federal reinforcements and trainloads are arriving at that depot. Regretfully, but decisively, Stuart shuts his mind to the highest adventure of all. Over the next 2 days, Stuart completes his return trip to Richmond, thus concluding what the Southern newspapers dubbed Stuart's ride around McClellan. He arrives back in Richmond on Sunday, June 15th, in great applause and fanfare from the admiring Southerners. Stuart's ride around McClellan from June 12th, 15th, 1862 is a bold and daring little adventure that propels Jeb Stuart to national stardom throughout the South, making him one of the most famous cavalry commanders in the Confederate Army. Most importantly for the future of the Peninsula Campaign, however, is Stuart's debriefing report to General Lee. In his report, Stuart informs Lee of the weakness of McClellan's lines, and Stuart's report on the encountering such little resistance to his riders behind enemy lines greatly encourages General Lee. Now, Robert E. Lee will begin drafting up plans for a major counteroffensive operation for his reorganized Army of Northern Virginia against McClellan's Army of the Potomac, scheduled to kick off in the last week of June.